Hi, it's Len. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles. Today is April 10th and 2020. I'm looking out at the ocean from the second floor of the cottage here at Ocean Park, Maine. I have an interview with Dean Koontz for you this week that I hope you'll enjoy. He has a new book out titled Devoted. It was published last week by Thomas and Mercer, the Amazon Publishing in print. And it coincided with the first week of our having a new dog, Sophie, a tiny little 2-pound Mickey puppy. And dogs figure importantly in the new book, Devoted, and you'll hear about that. I'm also going to catch up with some news stories that I've been following, and I think I've got a tech tip for you, so we might run a little longer than usual, but I'm going to try to keep it to the usual 45 minutes, largely because Darlene and I are going to be watching Little Women tonight on the TV downstairs after supper by the fire. So another stressful day in quarantine here on the coast of Maine. Not hardly. We feel very fortunate to be here and are keeping in touch with family and friends with Zoom and all kinds of the ways we're doing it. But we're both in good health and just taking this odd period a day at a time. And I hope something that you might hear this episode will reassure you and help you to this weekend, if you're listening to it on Saturday perhaps, or whenever you catch up with it. There's a news story that actually arrived a couple of weeks ago that I want to catch up with because it was a pretty interesting development. You may remember that I had Bradley Metrock on the show talking about how he was so incensed that Macmillan had changed the rules for libraries buying ebooks from Macmillan, that he put a ban on Macmillan employees attending Digital Book World, the conference that he holds in September in Nashville. And it's still on, by the way, under some pretty stringent new rules because of coronavirus. But, I admired Bradley's gumption to make such a bold move, and he was working in concert with the American Library Association. The librarians were very upset about the fact that Macmillan, effective November 1st, had said that when a new title came out, a library, Los Angeles Library or a small library in Vermont, could buy precisely one copy of it as soon as it was released, and then they would have to wait for 2 weeks to buy more of them. And that was something which just seemed to interrupt the flow of books, and it was called an embargo, and Macmillan took a lot of heat about it. I didn't really expect Macmillan to change their policy. They'd done a lot of study on it, and they had done analysis about the economics of making ebooks available to libraries and comparing it with the long history of making books in hardcover, and do they help sales or do they don't? I grant that it's a complicated transaction, but Macmillan found itself in kind of a difficult situation. Well, on March 17th, the CEO of Macmillan, John Sargent, a guy I've frequently disagreed with and thought was kind of taking the wrong position on ebooks, wrote a very short letter, and he addressed it to librarians, authors, illustrators, and agents. And I kind of love this letter. The first paragraph was a single sentence. It said, "There are times in life when differences should be put aside." And anybody that read that letter in the midst of coronavirus knew what he was talking about. And the letter stated that effective March 20th, or whenever Macmillan's wholesalers could effect the change, quote, "Macmillan will return to the library ebook pricing that was in effect October 31st, 2019. In addition, we will be lowering some ebook prices on a short-term basis to help extend library collections in these difficult times. Stay safe, John." Well, I just wanted to say bravo to that. I partly just because it was such a good letter. It didn't go on and on. It just basically said, we've changed our mind. These are crazy times, and we're just going to roll this thing back. Now, the new library ebook pricing that Sargent referred to had generated an uproar from public libraries and Bradley Metrock, as I said. And at issue, I had this wrong. It's a 2-month embargo. That when they made this change November 1st, a library would be able to buy an ebook when it came out, and then they'd have to wait 2 months, not 2 weeks, as I said earlier, before they could start buying other copies of the book to satisfy the demand by their patrons at the full price. And that was, that was pretty draconian, and that really did cause an uproar. In a Publishers Weekly story by Andrew Albanese on the day that the letter came out, he quoted a Macmillan spokesman as saying that removal of the embargo covers all of Macmillan's titles, including those of Tor, the publisher's science fiction imprint. I think Tor had actually tried out this new policy earlier, but Tor and everybody else, they were just going to go back to the way they had done it before. Sargent's surprising letter was met with widespread praise. A spokesman for the ALA was quoted by Publishers Weekly as saying, quote, "This is an extraordinarily welcome news in an unprecedented time." Bradley, I think I might have spotted the news before Bradley did. I sent him an email, and he quickly put something on his blog praising Sargent's letter, and he announced that the ban on Macmillan employees attending Digital Book World was officially over. Now, at this point, he still intends to hold Digital Book World in September in Nashville, but they're going to have rigorous protocols to ensure the safety of participants. For example, everyone is going to must be tested for COVID-19 before attending the conference, and the registration fee is going to include masks, which must be worn at all times during the event. I'll be interested to see if, even with those kinds of restrictions, he's able to control the event and have it held safely. So this was a classy move, I think, by John Sargent, and he's been kind of a lightning rod. In the past, I have found myself very much at odds with the role that he's played. He was very aggressive against Amazon when the Apple Books agency pricing first came out, and had a big showdown out in Seattle with Russ Grandinetti, and he's just really been, I don't know, maybe a hothead would be too not charitable or accurate, but very visible. So to have him come out and do this turnabout, it makes me think, maybe I'd like to get to know this guy. Maybe he'd be a good person to have on the show. And up until this surprising letter and evidence of his sensitivity to the moment and ability to hear people at the libraries being very critical of this move that would restrict ebook lending. I think it'd be interesting to have a conversation with him if I have a chance. A second news story came from Simon Cook in the UK. I suspect Simon's in London. I'm not exactly sure. He wrote me last month, "Hi, Len. Hope you are keeping well. Might not be a great interest stateside, but the UK have finally abolished the tax on digital books, a shot in the arm for UK ebook readers. Regards, Simon Cook." And he included a tweet that announced this news, that the value-added tax, the VAT, is going to be abolished effective December 1st on digital publications. That includes books, magazines, and academic journals. So thanks to Simon for that. We've been at this 11 years, and at the start, I just thought ebooks were going to take over the world, and it turned out there was quite a resistance to change, and the big publishers, and we all know the story. Sometimes I think in news like this, something sensible being done about the taxing structure in the UK for ebooks, Macmillan pulling back a little bit versus the libraries. In these turbulent times, I don't think you can really tell when the tide is turning on anything, but I hope that there's going to be more sensible pricing and just acceptance of ebooks as a really great way for a lot of people to read. Not the only way, and I would never stand in the way of people that want to read on paper, but in any event, that was a good piece of news, and I appreciate Simon sending that along. Another bit, this one involves Audible. I heard about this from John Aga. Audible came out with what looked to me to be a really smart enhancement of the audiobook reading process, and it was that for books that were enabled, you could be listening to an audiobook on your iPhone or your tablet, and then you could tap somewhere and you would see snippets, words appearing just after they're spoken. So you hear the audio, and then almost immediately, but with a little lag, you're seeing the letters of a few words on the screen. And this capability, Audible Captions, was, I think, picking up the text from the Audible track itself. Now the Big Five publishers and the Association of American Publishers pushed back. They sued Audible to try to stop this, claiming that it wasn't fair use, that it was an infringement on the copyright. And there was a case that it wasn't clear how the judge was going to rule, but in the midst of that, there was a settlement. And as I understand the settlement, Audible can have this capability, but any particular owner of the copyright can say, no, not on my book. So it's sort of a case-by-case rollout. I tried to see if I could find some books that have this ability now, and I couldn't find any reference to it. So I think that this lawsuit was settled a while ago, and it's not clear whether if there are any Audible books out there yet that have this. I'd love to try it. I'd love to try it on my iPhone and on the new iPad Pro that I'm experimenting with here. But I think it's an obvious benefit to people who have learning disabilities for reading or a second language. You can hear a book and then see the words come across. It's somewhat like immersion reading, which is a different capability that you can, where you're sort of pairing a Kindle book with an Audible book. But in that case, you've bought the Kindle book. And so maybe I don't know if the publishers ever resisted that one. But I'm glad that at least they had a settlement, and the door is still open on this technology. And I think it's definitely a good move on Audible's part. Amazon has been in the news. I saw a video of Jeff Bezos doing a tour of Whole Foods and a warehouse and kind of waving to folks. And I don't think he had been expected. And people were saying, "Hi, sir," and they didn't really know even what to call him. I'm sure it was quite a moment when all of a sudden the founder and CEO shows up, sort of strolling through the shelves. But he was raising the flag and thanking people for all the work they're doing. As James McQuivey said last week, there are some pressure points, and I can't even imagine the stress that people are under in these warehouses and at Whole Foods. Certainly not as much as healthcare workers themselves, but and there have been efforts to organize Amazon, and the labor issues are real, and I don't say that they're in any way simple, but in the midst of the pandemic, there's been pressure on Amazon on that topic. I think they've also done a pretty good job of responding to customers. One thing which is an example of this, I saw a notice, and then I found it on the internet, that I had a couple of items. I bought a belt that turned out to be too long when it showed up, and I had some Hewlett-Packard printer cartridges for the printer here, and they just didn't work. So I was ready to bundle them up and send them off. And for some reason, I couldn't get just a label to put in a box. They were giving me something that in a way is better. It was some kind of a QR code, and all I had to do was take the QR code on my phone to a UPS store, and they would, put these things in a box and take them back. Well, I wasn't so thrilled about going to a UPS store, and Darlene and I are being very careful about exposure here. And in the midst of that, I saw that Amazon was extending the time that I could return this, that they gave me the credit for the delay, and I don't have to return it now till May 31st. So typically you've got 30 days if you're going to return something. You put it through and they give you the refund, and then you have to make sure that it gets there within 30 days. And this is for most items purchased between March 1st and April 30th. So if you've got something that was bought in the current time frame and you're making a return, the pressure's off on getting it there during the usual time. And I think that was a good move on Amazon's part. On their returns policy page, they said the health and well-being of our customers, employees, and the communities we serve are of utmost importance to us. Therefore, we are temporarily extending the returns window to give you more time to send things back. Well done. And I think it's just amazing. I bought some pocket notebooks I was out of. We've got all kinds of things that just really are helpful for an extended stay. And the UPS truck drives up, and the guy puts the box on the porch, and we wait a day before we go out and get it. And when you think of all the people that are involved in making that happen, it's pretty heroic. It's certainly something that I feel very grateful for. I'll say that. There's a big piece of quiet news that I want to tell you about as a tech tip. I heard about it from Garrett Riley and David Enzel, and there's a post in the Daring Fireball blog by John Gruber that I'll include. And I studied this pretty closely because I really wanted to understand what this was about. It's basically that Amazon and Apple made a deal that enables Prime Video in-app purchases on an iPhone or another Apple device. And this is, it's been one of these situations where the big tech companies have been protecting their turf and made it inconvenient for customers. But now, if you have Prime, you can, and I tried this out. I was on my iPad in the Prime Video app on my iPad, and I wanted to rent something, so I came across Greta Gerwig's Little Women, the movie, available to rent in HD for $5.99. So this is on my iPad. I tapped the yellow button in the Amazon Prime Video app, and it showed my preferred credit card payment options, so I could tell from the last four numbers that this is the credit card I usually use when I'm buying on Amazon. I clicked on Rent Movie, and that's the movie we're going to be watching tonight. So it was kind of a nice improvement in the ease of getting things how I want them. I didn't have to leave my iPad, go to the Safari or something else. I was able to just navigate through the Apple app. And I think this is a pretty big departure because in the past, Apple was preserving the 30% share of revenue that it got. If someone like Amazon was selling something within the app, it had to go through Apple's App Store procedure, and they'd grab the 30%. Amazon said, well, no, we're not too interested in giving up 30%. So they made a deal, and I think what Apple gets out of the deal is that Amazon had to assure them that their app, the Prime Video app, works on all the various Apple devices, including Siri, and there's Apple TV and all, just the whole ecosystem of Apple is working with this Prime Video app, and that's good for Apple's customers. If you're an Apple person and you're all tapped into their setup, and you also like to get things on Prime Video, now it's easier for them. And as John Gruber wrote, it's a win for Apple, a win for Amazon, and a win for users in the Apple TV ecosystem. Well done. Time now for the interview. Dean Koontz, who has sold more than 500 million books worldwide, last week released Devoted, the first of 5 standalone novels for which he signed a contract last summer that generated a lot of coverage. He signed a contract with Amazon Publishing's Thomas & Mercer imprint. Devoted is a thriller based on the author's speculation about the intelligence of dogs, specifically a golden retriever named Kip, who in the novel is a member of the Mysterium, a sub-rosa telepathic network of canines who can read and learn language as well as humans. Kip comes to the aid of Woody, a high-functioning autistic 11-year-old boy whose mother is under attack by deeply bad characters. Dean has been on the show twice before talking about his first 2 projects with Amazon, and I've really been looking forward to the release of Devoted and to have a chance to talk with him about it. As it happens, our interview took place during Darlene's and my first week with a very small puppy, a Mickey named Sophie that we picked up a week ago today. That made me particularly interested in talking with Dean Koontz about Dogs, the new book, and his publishing experience with Amazon. We also touched on a bizarre internet meme that has given nonsensical credit to Dean Koontz for predicting the coronavirus pandemic. You'll hear about that. We connected here in Ocean Park and then to his home in Southern California by phone and by Skype on Wednesday, April 8th. I normally do kind of light editing of my interviews, but for reasons that I discussed in yesterday's Morning Journal flash briefing for Alexa, I decided to post this conversation exactly as it took place, and that includes an unscheduled pause that was made necessary by Sophie. Here's our conversation. Dean, this is Len Edgerly calling.
Yeah, I kind of anticipated. I guess I'm psychic.
I think so. You have special powers like a dog in the Mysterium.
How are you?
I'm good. I have a dog on my lap here because I just thought that seemed like it was the right thing to do. It's a 2-pound Mickey puppy that joined our family last week. So I think it's timely to talk to you about a novel that has dogs with amazing qualities.
What's his or her name?
Sophie.
Sophie.
Yes.
Sweet.
Really cute. Well, this is exciting. I really enjoy reading the book and have been looking forward to talking to you about it. I think the place I thought to start would be, it seems like some of your other books have had their genesis in your creation of them with a kind of a premise and a main character that was sort of pulling you forward into the story, and no outlines and things like that. But when you think back to when you first started working on Devoted, was there a clear premise and a character, or maybe did you see Woody and Kip at the same time? What were the sort of the generating sparks?
It was a little different this time. Different things. The genesis took place over a longer period of time. I had been thinking for quite some time that I wanted to revisit the whole idea of the human-dog bond that was really at the base of Watchers all those years ago. And I knew I didn't want to say that the dog's enhanced intelligence comes out of a laboratory. I wanted to dispense with that altogether. Because I'd been so interested in the subject of human-dog bonds and working with canine companions that produces assistance dogs for people with severe disabilities. And I've come to feel that there's much more going on inside a dog than we give them credit for. And that it occurred to me, I think the first fragment of what became the inspiration was one day I thought, what if you wrote a book about dogs that were not enhanced in a laboratory, but were simply the product of nature, that 100,000 years of human-dog interaction has led to an enhanced an evolutionary process in dogs that are bringing them closer to us, both intellectually and in other ways. And that hung in my head for a while, as I thought was interesting and a different way to approach the subject. And then CCI has, in recent years, been producing socializing dogs for children with autism, and it's been amazing what these dogs can do. They take away the emotional meltdowns, the inflexible behavior, and although the child is still autistic, it's a very different behavior from normal autistic children. And that was where Woody came into my head. I was thinking, I want a story in which the human and the dog are the central characters. There's others, of course. There's the boy's mother, that platoon of bad guys in this novel, not just one. And it was then the third element, which came along quickly after that, was I read a lot of science, and I found myself reading about archaea, this microbe that can transfer genetic material horizontally. We think of genetic material being transferred only vertically through generations, but it's only been within the last couple of decades that, that they have found out that archaea has this ability. It was thought to be a bacterium. It's now known to be another life form altogether. And as soon as I read that, I thought, aha. in the nature of human beings to always want to find their way to utopia. Somebody at some point will start trying to use archaea in transhuman science to enhance the species. And instead of it being a dog that's enhanced artificially, it's a human being that they're trying to enhance, and something goes horribly wrong. And then juxtaposed with that is the dogs in the Mysterium, this community of dogs who have evolved in a natural process, and I could contrast those two. And I think it was when that third element came together that the whole book fell together for me. Not the plot itself of what would happen, but where the book had to go. And at that point, I sort of knew what my ending had to be.
Yeah. So the pieces kind of gradually came your way. But the genesis of that dog-human bond, that's very intriguing to me. I kind of wonder, I saw someone describe the book. It's a very unusual book. It's not, it's a standalone novel. It's not like some of your recent work, and they said it could be the making of a classic. And I wondered, well, what makes a classic? If 50 years from now, the dog-human bond is understood by science in as much of an advance as if you compare what we know about dogs 40 years prior to this, when you said they didn't even think that dogs had emotions. Can you see this book as sort of a pointer toward understandings about dogs that decades hence will look kind of routine?
Who knows? I'm no Nostradamus, although the internet has been claiming I am lately. I didn't predict the coronavirus.
Yes.
Nonsense. But I don't know whether a book is a classic, whether a book is prognosticating or not. First, I wanted to say something about the human condition at the same time that it is highly entertaining. And if you can do those two, that's, I think, all that fiction can be asked to do, aside from character and storytelling and all that. But yeah, it is the case that only 30 years ago or so, science told us dogs have no emotions akin to ours. We just anthropomorphize them when we think they do. Now, of course, they can look at dogs' brains and a human brain. They light up exactly the same ways to the same stimuli. And we know now that dogs do have our emotions. Doesn't it strike you odd that within our lifetime there were science felt that they didn't?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that anyone who's owned one dog would know in their bones that dogs have the same emotion we do. But no, it's science sometimes gets stuck in its preconceived ideas and has trouble getting out of them. And also, 30 years ago, you would have been told that dogs' level of intelligence can never reach a certain level because of the size of their brains. But brain science has moved forward, and though there's still a prejudice against size in brains, there is an awareness that size is not all of it, and that the brain remains as mysterious almost as it's always been, even though we have learned more and more about the functioning of the brain. We still have no idea where consciousness comes from. That is the great mystery. And they would still tell you to this day, dogs are not conscious like human beings are. And I'm sorry, but they are. They have a self-awareness. And anyone who's had 2 or 3 dogs knows that each one of them is a unique personality, that they aren't just identical because of their breed. They share certain qualities, but they're individuals. So who knows where anything goes, although I have this, sometimes when I think about it, I get the hair on the nape of my neck goes up in a kind of good way, because I think we see around us some evidence that intelligence in nature may not be as limited as we have always thought. And that was something else I sort of wanted to say in this story.
My puppy is making noises and looking like she's going to pee on the bed. Can you hold on a minute while I take her downstairs?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll be right back. Come on, Sophie. Come on. Come on. Come on. Darlene, can you take Sophie? She's interrupting my interview here. Darlene? You got to take Sophie. She's interrupting my. All right. Well, 2 pounds of dog has changed my life radically in the past week.
Yeah, that's what they do.
Yeah. Well, now I think you've had 3 golden retrievers that came from Canine Companions for Independence, and what you just said about how individual dogs have their own kind of characters. Is Kip drawn more on one of those 3 dogs than the others?
I think, well, first he's sort of being one of the Mysterium, one of the secret society of elevated dogs. He's a little different, so his point of view has to be one that's not exactly that of a dog that would be the companion I've ever had. But yeah, I watched the 3 dogs. I think each one of them, there's parts of each one of them in this. I would say of the 3 we've had, and Golden Retrievers are an exceedingly affectionate breed, they've all been very loving. But our 3rd one, Elsa, is over the top in that regard. And she's also by far the most independent of the 3. So that little independent streak in her, which isn't disobedient, it's just that, you know, she has her own attitude about things, which I find charming and wonderful. If it was disobedience, it'd be something else. But it's really interesting. And so we give her a little of her own head. And so I think that helped me form an idea of how Kip would be if he was more intelligent than, or nearly as intelligent as some human beings I've known, or maybe most human beings.
The other wonderful character in the book is Megan Bookman, Woody's mother, and you've talked about how Jane Hawk reflects how, I think each important part of your life there was a strong woman who was guiding you. And is Megan Bookman kind of key off one of the women in your past more than the others, or what's sort of her lineage into your own powerful connections with strong women?
Well, there's a little bit of my mother in her because, you know, she's a mother in this book, and that is a key part of she wants to defend her son. And my mother, who was sickly all her life and had no option but to be married to my dangerous father, nevertheless protected me from him as best she could when I was very young. And so there's some of that in how Megan rises to the challenge when a very bad man enters their house. And so I'm sure there's some of my mother in that character. And a little bit of the high school English teacher I had for 4 years, who was a whack in World War II, and very indomitable. And then there's some of my wife in there. There's no question about that. So yeah, when you're a young writer, you don't realize quite how much you draw on people you know, because you're creating characters that aren't exactly people you know, but you are drawing on the qualities of them. And as you get older, you begin to recognize that more often than not. Sometimes you're surprised that after you finish a novel, you look at it and say, my God, that's so-and-so more than anyone else. But yeah, so there's pieces of everybody there. Yeah. And because I've seen so many mothers with autistic children that have gone through the Canine Companion process, and you see what courage it takes to go, not to go through the program so much, but to raise a child with that kind of disability it's pretty amazing and pretty daunting. So I think it was probably watching that and seeing that kind of courage against the vicissitudes of life that is in that character.
Your bad guys are really bad in this book. This Lee Shackett is excruciatingly bad, and I think you made a reference to this in an interview I read, that you never want these guys to look glamorous, and you succeed in that, but you're also open to having them be a little bit humorous, that they're sort of foolish, they're so bad. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. That's one thing I always want to shy away from, is that the evil character is made to be glamorous. I don't want somebody saying, oh, that character was so cool. And the best way I can defeat that is somebody like Lee Shackett, who is absolutely terrifying, nevertheless is something of a fool, which is the way I believe. Evil works in the short term, but it never works in the long term, so it's a foolish choice. Now, the character can't know he's amusing. It has to be a kind of darkly amusing side to him that the reader sees. And I used to have, when I started doing this many years ago, I had some editorial pushback saying, well, if we see that he's foolish and he's kind of unintentionally funny, but we see he's funny, that makes him less scary. And I thought, no, it makes him scarier because it gives him another dimension. And you normally think that if you can laugh with or at somebody, you can't scare them, or you can't be scared by them. But in fact, if they're evil enough, that makes them even a little scarier when you see that other side to them. And there's a platoon of hitmen in this story that are almost as bad as Lee Shackett, but they are funnier than he is, I will have to say. Lee is a little bit misguided, and more than a little bit misguided. He's about as evil as they come. But he's a little misunderstands a lot of things in life. And the bad guys in the story, the other bad guys, these hitmen, they're of a different level. They're not quite as abysmally evil as Lee Shackett, but they are pretty awful human beings. And I had more chance there to let them interact with each other and have a little fun with them.
Yes, some fun was had. Coronavirus landed right in the middle of your final preparations. I think the book was published March 31st. How did that change what the plan had been for this book being published by Amazon Publishing, Thomas and Mercer and all?
Well, one thing it changed was I was doing an awful lot of interviews for this, which Amazon had arranged, and radio and podcasts and magazines and newspapers and that sort of thing. And in the midst of all this, I was blindsided by this internet thing that showed up that suddenly I had supposedly predicted. Now, of course, I didn't. Somebody married a page from a book by probably Sylvia Browne or somebody, of predictions, and married it to a page from The Eyes of Darkness. And I didn't predict 2020 and the coronavirus, but in the book I did have the Wuhan 400 virus. And my novel was not about a pandemic, but it did use this as what Hitchcock would have called a MacGuffin. It was the thing that drove the story in it, but it isn't a novel about pandemic. But you couldn't seem to explain that to anyone. Once this craziness starts, there's no way to stop it. And we've now counted, I had over 100 requests for interviews to explain how I knew that this was going to happen in 2020. And I finally, the first time, and I refused to take any of those interviews. I don't want to, this thing has become, the media has turned it into an outright panic. There's been panic mongering that I find really regrettable, and it's made this thing far worse than I some days think what the panic that's been created is worse than the virus itself because of what it's driven in policy decisions and how on edge it's put people. So I didn't want to be part of that. But finally, I was doing an interview. I also have been doing interviews for my British publisher, an Australian publisher, and they wanted me to do an interview with the Australian and the literary editor there. He was an excellent interview and everything, but everybody had to be warned. I would not talk about coronavirus or any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, that's understandable, but would you at least give me a line or two that I can use in a column I write separately from the interview I'll be doing? So I thought maybe this would be a way to put an end to all this if it got on the internet. So see if I get this right. I said, I gave him a line a week before we did the interview, which was, considering what is being said about me and the coronavirus, my power as a prognosticator is greatly overestimated, considering that I can't even predict what I'll have for dinner tonight. And that did get around a little, but it didn't stop anything.
No.
So, yeah. Oh. So I think it's fading down now, and I hope just that it fades away entirely. But,
well, do you think that crazy meme was part of, I mean, the book is doing pretty well. It's number 3 on the most sold fiction list at Amazon, and there were more pre-orders for your book than any other. Do you think the wrong-headed view of you as a coronavirus prognosticator might have helped sell the book?
It probably won't hurt. And in fact, the potential is in the book for, I've raised the issue with Archaea that there is a kind of bizarre potential for a pandemic in that. And I did say to my agents, it's pretty bizarre considering I actually did write a novel about a pandemic. Among other things, it was a book called Innocence, and the pandemic starts because of a biological warfare experiment in North Korea. And nobody seems to pay any attention to that book and its connection. No. It's this other one. So it's you have to kind of take it all with an enormous grain of salt.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I recall that when you were talking about your when your agent went out and was looking for the possibility of a new publishing relationship, and there have been 7 or 8, including Amazon, and that the Amazon marketing strategy that they presented, I think you said it had 30 pages compared to just several pages of some of the others. But anyway, it had been a very impressive plan for what they would do with your books. And this is the first novel that now you've actually seen them in real time in operation. Did it kind of match their plan, or were there aspects of it that surprised you, or what's your overall impression of having had your first book actually be in the hands of Amazon to the market?
Well, it's first of all, it's been amazing working with them, and there's so much creativity, energy, and enthusiasm that I was kind of blown away by it, and that has not changed. That has been, I mean, they've been here 3 times with film crews. What we're doing on social media is beyond anything that I've seen before that related to my work. And that has inspired me to get more involved with social media and provide them with posts and so forth. And everything about it, I mean, from the cover, and now we've just finalized the cover to Elsewhere, which is a fabulous cover. And everything has worked like clockwork on this, except, of course, the whole economy is shut down.
Right.
Which is not the good way to launch with a new publisher, but they did have a plan to do New York Times book review ad and a number of things, which they pushed back a month or so, which makes perfect sense since so many bookstores aren't open.
Right.
So that kind of has flummoxed us. Part of the marketing plan can't really be fulfilled till people are back leading their lives, which had better be sooner than later before there isn't any economy left to bring back. And so given the wrench that was thrown into the works here, I think they're really doing a good job. So I'm pleased by it. It's just we all wish we could have floated into this in different circumstances. But you have to deal what you have to deal with.
Yeah. Now, is Elsewhere your next standalone novel from Amazon Publishing?
Yeah, it's. I had an a great deal of fun with it. I've been energized by this relationship. So, that one comes out unless the world throws us another curve. I think it comes out in October.
But can you tell us a little bit about that story?
I'll give you the opening. It's a father-daughter. She's 11. He's 30-something. And his wife walked out on them 7 years ago when the girl was 4. And they don't know what happened to her. She was dissatisfied with the life she was living there. And he's still in love with her. And the daughter, of course, crushingly misses her. They live in this canyon back from the ocean, live in a tourist town in California. But they live in this kind of semi-remote canyon. And at the end of that canyon is in the woods is a homeless encampment. And one of the homeless there is a little different than you expect. He goes into town every day for a shower in the facility. He's got a mane of white hair. He wears a sport coat with a bow tie. And he has, when the book opens, he has been stopping by to sit on the porch and chat with them for some weeks now. And on the night the book opens, he shows up on their porch, but in a totally different mood. And he's always sort of implied that he is a man of great learning and everything else. And he tells Jesse, he comes with a little box that he's tied up with string and gives him this and says, "Keep this for me. I'm a famous physicist. I'm not a homeless person. I'm on the run and hiding out as a homeless person. And everyone is looking for me. And what's in this box costs $76 billion to invent and produce. And if they ever get their hands on it, we're all finished. Keep it for a year. And if I don't come back, put it in a barrel, fill the barrel with cement, take the barrel out on a boat and drop it in 1,000 feet of water."
Wow.
And he then leaves, and they think, oh, well, he is, after all, a sort of crazy homeless man. But the next day, the NSA is flooding into this canyon in search of this guy. And they've got this object they've got to hide. And pretty soon it becomes known that they may have it. What that object is and why everybody wants to have it is then where the book goes to. But that little bit I gave you is really like the first couple of chapters.
Yeah, wow. Are you enjoying writing standalone novels more than writing series, that each one's sort of a new creation and you're not sort of following publishers' expectations to give us another book like that?
It's, I had once said way back in the day I would never write series for the very reason that I felt it was too much of the same old. And then I started to write the Moonlight Bay thing, and I had a disagreement with the publisher there about book 2, and I delayed 3 and didn't go on. But then Odd Thomas hit me, and the character fascinated me so much, just as Jane Hawk did, that I sort of broke my own rule, and I started into a series and then another series, and I did the 4 or 5 Frankenstein books. But generally speaking, I still prefer standalones. Now, if another character hits me and I say, "Whoa, there's much more I could do with that," then I would go with it. But if the first book really is strong with me, and I think I can't take the character anywhere that makes him or her grow, then why do this? So right now I'm at standalone territory.
Good. Well, anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention related to the book or any of your other work?
I think we've covered a lot of territory here.
Good.
So you do a good job interviewing. I'm not going to be my own interviewer.
That's right. Do you think a person is crazy to bring a puppy into the family in the midst of a pandemic? No. I think it probably makes the terror of the pandemic that much easier to bear. My experience of dogs is they take you out of yourself. A very bad day can turn into a good one when you get that moment at the end of the day where you spend with the dog playing or cuddling or just sharing, watching a movie together on the sofa. It brings you back to what's real about life at its essence, and I think that's good. Yeah.
If I didn't already have a dog, I'd be trying to get one, I think, in the midst of all this craziness.
Well said. I've been speaking with Dean Koontz, the author of Devoted, a novel published last week by Thomas and Mercer, an imprint of Amazon Publishing. Thanks very much, Dean.
Thank you. Thanks for having me there.
I'll add a content note before I sign off and tell you that because of the conversation with Dean, I was very curious to read his memoir that was published in 2009 titled A Big Little Life, a memoir of a joyful dog named Trixie. Now, Trixie was the first of their 3 golden retrievers, and it's eerie to read it because even in the first few pages, I'm seeing things about Dean's relationship with Trixie that a decade later he turned into this powerful story in the new novel. So it's very fun to read the memoir and then see what developed out of those ideas in the novel. And it's also a great book to prepare me for a long time, hopefully, with Sophie, our new little puppy. A Big Little Life, amazingly reviewed. It's got 5.0 stars, just like a perfect score of people leaving reviews on it, and 1,338 passages have been highlighted to 20,698 times. So it's a book that a lot of people have thoroughly enjoyed. Next week's guest is going to be David Burley of Overdrive. He's been on the show a number of times over the years, and I thought following up on that news about Macmillan changing its mind about pricing of ebooks for libraries, it would be good to catch up with what Overdrive has been doing. I've noticed that they are opening up some of their catalog to libraries in a way that keeps, I think, makes there fewer limits on how many people can be borrowing books, and so they're doing some creative things in the midst of the pandemic to make more reading available through their extensive network with public libraries. That's it. Thanks for joining me. It's a quiet night. I think we might have another storm coming, but the waves are tame compared to what they've been this week. We had some real storms come through, and the ocean was wild and strong looking out. It's quite a nice sight. And in these cold nights, we've been having fires in the fireplace and reading and watching good shows on the Fire TV edition. Whatever, I don't know what the brand of it is. I know it's a Fire TV, so we just have one clicker. And I hope you're doing well and that you're having the chance to settle in safely somewhere that gives you a chance to consider the important things in life, and as well as staying plugged into the drama that's overtaking us worldwide. It's really an amazingly historic moment to be alive and to be so connected. That's the thing that wasn't the case back in 1918, the last time something like this got circling the globe. Take care.